Hey everybody, it says we're live. I'm Trace, and I'm here from DNews in California, and we're talking with NASA peeps for our first 2015 monthly Space Out. We've also got some other experts here, so we'll let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Trace, I'm with DNews. Maybe you've heard of us. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/DNews. We've also got Ian O'Neill over there. Hi, Ian.
Hey Trace, good to be here. I'm Ian O'Neill, space producer for Discovery News, space.discoverynews.com. So check out the site for any really cool stuff on space. And we've also got Amy with us.
Yes, hey everyone, happy to be here doing more space stuff. I blog Vintage Space at Popular Science and vlog Vintage Space on YouTube, and also host on DNews, which is why some of you might recognize me. Yeah, and just all space all the time. And let's move on to our proper guests of honor here.
Oh yeah, so we've also got Nadine. Hi Nadine.
Hi, glad to be here today. I'm Nadine Lashier. I'm a Chief Training Officer here at Johnson Space Center.
Awesome. And who's this other handsome devil over here? Who's that guy?
You must be talking about Jared. No, hi, I'm Reid Wiseman. I spent the last 6 months up on the International Space Station as part of Expedition 40 and 41. I returned to Earth on November 10th, and now that I can walk under 1G and I'm feeling good, I decided it's a great day for a Google Hangout. So thanks for inviting me, guys, and I really look forward to some fun this afternoon.
Great. Well, great to have you. Let's see, I guess we can just get started. We are taking questions throughout the Hangout, so if you'd like to tweet at us, you can tweet at DNews and use the hashtag SpaceOut, everybody, and we'll be able to try and get to your questions. We're also taking questions on our various YouTube pages and testtube.com. So check it out. Hopefully we can get to your question. Ian, why don't you go, and I know you're itching to get started.
Yeah, I mean, we have a ton of questions, so this is going to be probably overrun. So you may have to make some other lunch plans. But yeah, so really, I mean, my first question is, I suppose one of the biggest things that I always ask is, what is the average day for an astronaut on the International Space Station? So we understand you do lots of experiments, you do a lot of zero-G floating, you have a lot of fun, by looks, you take a lot of stunning photographs. There's a lot of hard graft behind all this, or what we do see. But what actually goes into your average day? Is it very regimented, or is it like a little bit more easy on you? It depends on the day. I mean, what actually goes on your average day in the space station?
Yeah, sure, Ian. So, of course, it is very regimented. We have the only reason we're successful in space is because of the ground team that's supporting us. And really, those are the people that manage our lives up there. I was just joking yesterday with Karen Nyberg, who came back about 1.5 years ago from the space station. I said, I actually want to go back up there, not to be in space, but to have this team running my life again, because it's so nice when you have all these people making the decisions and you're just the executor up there, the operator on the other end. But the average day, it's a lot like an Earth day. So you're up in the morning at around 6:30. You've got about a half an hour to shower, we'll call it shower, brush your teeth, eat your breakfast, and then we always start the morning with a daily planning conference where we talk to the control centers all the way around the world, and we just see what's going on with our space station, is everything working well, and what do we have for the day ahead. And then from there, you just jump in, and you're going for about the next 10 straight hours, and you're either conducting science, you're working on maintenance, usually a blend of both, some science and some maintenance, and then you also have about 2 hours of physical activity, running on the treadmill and lifting weights. And I'll tell you, it's high intensity. There's never an easy day with the workout, and there's never an easy day with just the regular work of science and maintenance. And then around 6:30 or 7 p.m., we all get back together. The whole crew comes together on the radio, and we talk to all the control centers one more time to kind of recap the day and see where we are. And then from then until about 10 p.m., is our time to eat dinner and just decompress a little bit. So we could watch a TV show. I like to read, so I read some novels in the evening. But of course, you don't want to waste too much time with that, because the Earth is so beautiful, and you want to always take some time and go look out the window. And so throughout the day, I would sneak peeks, but really it's after dinner when you have about a good hour to an hour and a half of true free time, and you always look to see what part of the world you're over, see what kind of crazy things you can capture outside the window. But really, in a nutshell, that's the basic gist. So it's a lot like any day on Earth, but floating makes it a little different.
It's a lot like it, but not like it also. That's really awesome. So, and then Nadine, your job is to like prepare them for all of this stuff. How do you even go about? There's so much that they have to learn. So how do you go about that?
Okay, well, so as a training lead, I have a team of instructors that are all experts in the various systems, life support, maintenance, EVA, things like that. We get together and we build a training plan for each particular astronaut. So like we looked at Reid, we looked at his background, the things he'd done so far, and tailored the program, the training plan to help him be the best that he could be. It's about a 2.5-year process to train a new astronaut. If you've flown before, we can reduce that some because you already have some of that experience. But really, it's a big team effort, and we do everything from training the specifics of a particular system to doing full integrated multiple system training, things like emergency scenarios, things like that.
Seems like a lot.
Yeah, so I suppose
it's a full-time job.
Yeah, in addition to that question, really, I'm just wondering, what's your main challenges when facing an astronaut for the first time? Is it psychological, or is it really more physical? Really, those main challenges about going into space when training.
And Ian, do you want me to take that, or you want Nadine to take that? I think from my perspective,
Nadine or yourself, yeah.
The biggest challenge for me going up on my first flight was, you know, the science you can take your time with. The maintenance you can take your time with. The thing that we can't take our time with is if things go wrong up there. So for me and working with my crew is the emergency procedure training. And what are the things that we really need to memorize about the system? What are the things that can really hurt us? Or if we don't react in a timely fashion, what are the things that could lead to loss of our mission or even worse, loss of our crew? And so that is really where we spend. It's kind of interesting because that's where we spend the bulk of our time training. But then that's the thing we use the least when we're up there. But that's the way we want it for sure. And so from my perspective, that's really where I wanted to focus my training. The big picture, what are the emergency procedures, and what are the systems that I'm going to need to survive and if the day happens to go bad. And luckily we had a really great mission and we didn't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah.
Related to... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to say that's one of the challenges of the training team is balancing out the training for things that can go wrong, plus just making sure that they know enough about the day-to-day operations to do the maintenance and the science that they need to do.
Yeah.
So related to sort of training to go into space and kind of training for disasters and stuff, is there any psychological training to send someone up into space or to be sent up into space?
So yeah, Amy, it's a great question.
I always wonder if Lee is above the 17th. Do you have to think about that?
Kind of losing you there a little bit, Amy. But why don't we go with that? Reid, what kind of psychological training do you need?
So yeah, to recap, the psychological training, and then I think Amy was also asking right before we lost her real quick was, do you ever have this feeling you're really far away, you're 250 miles up, and you're hurtling through space at 17,000 miles an hour, and do you ever kind of have some maybe mental issues with that? And we do some work with the psychiatrist, psychologist type of team, and we just talk about seclusion, being away for a long time. We also do a few leadership courses. We went away and did a sea kayaking trip with just the 6 of us and 2 instructors. And so we do kind of some seclusion type activities to get us ready for that. And then we really talk a lot about previous expeditions, what has gone well, what has gone wrong, and we try to just have a really open communication path between the crew and the ground so that if somebody's doing something getting on your nerves, you got to tell them quick. It's like operating on a submarine or down in the Antarctic, you know, all these different crazy places that people have operated. We just kind of follow the same methodology up there in space. And then for the second half of Amy's question, do you ever have that, like the crazy moment? And definitely. There were times in the cupola, which is a series of 7 windows, and it gives you a 360-degree view of the entire Earth. It's gorgeous. But there were times in the cupola where I would just be free-floating, taking pictures, and all of a sudden I would have that instantaneous feeling that I'm falling, and you reach out and grab a handrail really quick, and then all of a sudden everything is neutralized again. So you definitely have it from time to time, but it wasn't as much as I thought it would be. I got to do 2 spacewalks, and I never once had that feeling of solitude or fear or anything. The spacewalk was really a very peaceful and extremely enjoyable view out at our Earth, and really amazing experience for me.
Yeah, which reminds me of one of like the overview effect. Is that what you were talking about, Ian? Is that?
Yeah, I think because when I've spoken to astronauts before, they've mentioned the overview effect, and I've kind of been intrigued by that because it's kind of a psychological. I mean, some people have referred to it as like a spiritual awakening, where you can see the whole planet. I mean, you're in such a privileged position to see the whole planet. It's going to change your perspective on life. I'm just wondering how that affected you, if you had a similar kind of experience while in space.
A lot of people have asked me that, Ian, and I don't think that I had this epiphany. I didn't have this just aha moment where I had a kind of a spiritual change. But what definitely changed with me was watching our planet over 6 months, and I'm so lucky to have spent essentially 6 months up there. I got to realize that I used to just think of our planet as a bunch of rocks that we live on, but our planet is every bit as alive as we are. And when you watch it from this unique perspective way up high, and you watch it for as long as we got to watch it, I can watch the seasons change. I can watch winds reshaping the desert dunes. The things that we were able to see, the volcanoes, the typhoons, hurricanes, all that stuff, it did reshape the way I think of our planet. And our planet is every bit as alive and so much more alive than any of us. And so long after we're gone, our planet's going to continue this reshaping. And if at some point it doesn't like humans, it's just going to brush us off the face and just start reshaping itself. And so I think people just, the biggest takeaway for me was that our Earth is super alive, and it's really cool to see it.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be an astronaut. I'm sorry. This is just, I wish my eyesight was better.
Okay, so Ian wants to be an astronaut. Nadine, first step. What does he have to do?
Well, first of all, you have to get selected. But other than that, then you have to go through training. You get a lot of just basic training, and then you have to get selected to fly on a mission, and then you get more specialized training. That's where that 2.5 years comes in. So Reid and Alex both had training prior to being selected, and then when they came in, were selected to fly with this expedition, then that's when the 2.5 years started. So it's a lot of work, but you have to be willing to study.
Yeah, because Reid's got a military background. Do you find as when you're training astronauts, the astronauts with a military background adapt faster, perhaps, to the regime that you're putting them through, or doesn't it really matter? It's just something you kind of learn.
I think from my perspective, it's really just very personality dependent as opposed to what their exact background is. We've seen that the guys and gals that come in from the military background are stronger in some areas already, but the ones that come in from science or medical backgrounds are stronger in other areas. So it's really just finding what area that person is the weakest in, and then helping fill that in.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, go for it, Reid, I think.
Okay, and just to pile on, because Ian wants to be an astronaut, I think the common thread that I look at when I look across NASA, the Russian Space Agency, Japan, Germany, Europe, all of us seem to have a pretty solid operational background. So the people that we hire, the scientists that we hire, they were like off in the Congo studying Ebola, and the volcanologist that I flew with, he was on icebreaker missions around the world, like seeking out these volcanoes and living on the sides of these mountains. And so when you look at it, yeah, we have a huge sweep of different disciplines here. We have school teachers. So there's really no background, but the common thread I see is, first of all, everybody loved their previous job, and everybody in their previous lifestyle was doing something very operational, and they were really out there in the field kind of doing that sort of work, and that seems to be the thread that holds us together the tightest.
Yeah, everybody knows how to get down and do what needs to be done. That's very cool. I'm going to switch to a viewer question from, it's in viewer questions, but it's actually from Jared Oban, who is our social guy. Who is that guy? He's running this hangout right now. Hi, Jared. And he said, what is the internet like in space? Because, Reid, you were very active on social media with pictures and tweets and vines. And Jared wants to know, what is the internet like in space?
Oh, Jared, I don't want to let you in on all of my secrets from up there. So we do. I could break the internet up into two pieces in space. So we have an internet just like we have down here, but it's very slow. It's not very slow, but it's slow. It's tough to watch a YouTube video kind of thing. And you can get on Twitter and you can send an individual tweet, but it would take about 20 to 30 minutes to really log in, and it's all satellite communication dependent. And we're going so fast, we would have satellite handovers from time to time, and that knocks your connection off and you need to reconnect. So what we do have that is very reliable is email. And so I would email, and if we're in a satellite no coverage zone, that email just holds in a buffer, and then it would send. So for me to be able to work these vines and to work these tweets, it really takes a little bit of help on the ground, and I had a great right-hand man who was helping me. So I would write the tweets, and I would take the pictures, put them in an email, and send them down, and about 2 years ago, we got live email on the space station. So my email would come down to this guy within a second of me doing it, and he would put it right on Twitter. And so my tweets were really going. I was definitely live tweeting, but it does take a second setting.
So you weren't necessarily logged into Twitter at the time, but you were relaying that information to somebody who could be logged in at live.
That's correct. So on the weekends, I would log into Twitter, and I was doing some of my own tweeting. But on the workday, the value of getting out real-time tweets in the middle of the workday, it outweighs me trying to take an hour or two a day and send that out. So that's the way that we've worked it for the last couple of years, and it seems to work really well. And so I think we'll keep going in that direction.
Cool. Amy, I think you want to try another question here?
Yeah, we're going to see if my video is any better now, hopefully.
So much better.
Good, awesome. So one of the things that I kind of wanted to know about, just because you're always doing crazy experiments in space, and this is kind of a two-part question, is what was sort of the weirdest things that NASA had you doing on your time on the ISS? And also, because we know that figuring out how humans work in space is a big question about manned spaceflight, were you ever an experiment? Did they ever do like weird things, like put you through strange physical tests to see what would happen, or like I cannot for the life of me remember who I spoke to that NASA took a Bic pen worth of muscle tissue out of him after he got back from space to see what atrophy looked like? I mean, did they do weird stuff to you up there?
I just have to point out, Nadine was just laughing really good during you asking that question. I just want to point that out. She's like, no way, no way.
Maybe it's such a good question, but I think you need to rephrase it, and you need to ask, was there any time that you weren't a scientific experiment during your 6 months?
Right.
And that's a better way to look at it. So to touch on some of the topics that you discussed, I've been shocked. I've been muscle biopsied. I've ultrasounded myself in space, my entire heart, all my leg muscles, our eyes. We do eye ultrasounds once a month to see what's going on there. And so really, I just reviewed today. They gave me all my data back from my own the research that was done on me. It's not my research, because there's, of course, super smart scientists doing this. But I got to really look at the amount of experiments that were done on me when I was up there, and it's a binder about that thick. And so some of them are really fun and extremely interesting. The body is an amazing machine, and it adapts and changes to its conditions extremely quick. So when I got to space, it was only 2 or 3 weeks, and I had already had big change in the muscles in my legs. I'd had big change in the pressure as the blood volume brushes up to my head in weightlessness, and then my heart compensates and my blood volume reduces to try to reduce this pressure. So what happens in the body is incredible, and it's trying always to adapt and find that equilibrium. And so I was a science experiment from the start to the end, and even for the next probably 4 or 5 months, I still have, every week I have little experiments that I have to go into. So yeah, we are definitely probably the most researched part on the space station is us up there. And then from the science side, we were doing all sorts of crazy things. You know, we've been flying in space since '61, and we've had the space station for 14, 15 years. But what I loved about the science up there, I figured we've already looked at everything, but we haven't even scratched the surface. And I would be working with researchers at MIT across the U.S., across the world, really. And whenever they had a video on their science experiment that I was operating for them, there was every single time they would go, holy smokes, I didn't expect that. Wait, go back and do what you just did and do it again and let me watch what's going on. I did flame research where that happened. I did liquid research, fuel research, and capillary flow, it didn't matter. Across the spectrum, especially in general sciences, these people would just go crazy on the science that's going on up there. And it makes you as an astronaut really excited to be working with them because you hear their excitement and it gets you fired up.
So what was your favorite experiment? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and on that same vein, Priyam Gupta on Twitter wants to know what's the funniest experiment.
I also really want to know why you were shocked. Like,
okay, let's work backwards. Let's work backwards again, Amy. So the reason I was shocked is the human brain will prevent your muscle from working all the way to 100% so that it doesn't hit a muscle fatigue or muscle failure level. So as you're working on like a leg extension or a leg press, your brain will start to stop that muscle, usually around 90%. And so the scientists, in order to make sure that you're really pushing as hard as humanly possible, they'll hit you with a nice electric shock, and they'll watch that muscle fiber twitch right when you're pressing at your maximum, and they'll look at the little peak, and they can determine how much does your brain cut down on the use of this muscle. And my hair's standing up my arms just thinking about this. I don't like it at all, but really over time you get used to it. And it's not too bad. It's nothing as bad as it used to be in the olden days. They would shock you for anything. But now that was one other interesting one that I did was shocking is this was a Japanese experiment to look at, you know when you're laying down in bed and you stand up really quick and the blood rushes out and you get a little bit dizzy? Well, in space, that's a big deal when we come home. And now we stand up and our body cannot compensate for that. I think it's called orthostatic intolerance. But the Japanese were putting electrodes back here, right behind my ears, and they would put little pulses of energy in, little electrical currents in, and they would pulse them back and forth. And I would lay on a table here on Earth, and as they would hit my right side, I felt like I was turning left. And as they would hit my left side, I felt like I was turning right. And just using these little electrical pulses, they were just a little uncomfortable. They didn't really hurt. But they could really drive my brain around. And I actually, tomorrow morning, I have to go meet them and do another one of their tests. But it's just amazing stuff. So that kind of answers Amy's half of the question. And then stepping back into, I think my favorite experiments was anything that worked with fluids. The way that we look at water our whole lives, and water is everything for a human. And then when you go into space, it's so completely different. If you just put a water bottle on a table, your water separates into two separate hemispheres. And so you'll have a ball of water at the top of your bottle and a ball of water at the bottom, and there will be nothing in the middle of this water bottle. And then when you unscrew the lid, water will just start to come out the top of the water bottle and just seep down the sides real slowly. And so all of that stuff, for me, the water stuff was just amazing. And I got to do some really neat experiments with a bunch of teams at different colleges throughout the East Coast on some fuel inside of a tank and what really happens in zero-G. And the results were so crazy that they immediately took them and started funneling them into the SLS program, which is NASA's next big rocket to take us off to the moon, an asteroid, and Mars. And so that work was just, it was so interesting. It was immediately fed into the engineering data, and it makes you really happy.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, it seems like there's so much to learn. So, Nadine, it's 2.5 years of training, which is way more than the 6 months you actually spend in space. I think that's kind of important to point out. But how do you know what to teach an astronaut? Because once they're up there, they're hands off, literally. You can talk to them, but you can't walk them through things as easily, I guess.
Well, both yes and no. I mean, you're right. Once they're on board, it's definitely not as easy, but we do have ways to do onboard training. We call it just-in-time training. People will, here on the ground, will film videos to send up to the crew on how to do something, or pictures or things like that. So that can help with some of either the critical things or the new things that we didn't have time to train them on. But that is actually one of our ongoing challenges is, we've got 2.5 years, and not just training here in Houston, but training at all of our international partner sites as well. And there's just so much, there's no way that anybody could know all of that stuff and memorize all of that. So it's really important for us to keep track of what's the really critical things, show it to them more often. So repetition is important, and also just trying to make sure and give context, big picture context of how do things work, so that when they run into something on board, that hopefully, we may not have trained them on that one specific thing, but hopefully they've got an idea of how the whole system works and can help work it out. Plus, the ground is available, and hopefully can help talk them through anything they don't remember.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure there's manuals and different procedures that you have for so many different things.
Yep.
Going through NASA documents it's a huge library.
Yes, it is.
That's pretty much Amy's whole job, by the way. It's like looking at NASA stuff.
Sift through NASA archive documents for fun. Yeah. It's fun for me.
Let's go to another viewer question. How often do you interact with astronauts from other countries? You mentioned the Japanese scientists you talk to. When you're in space, do you interact with, obviously the other astronauts on the ISS, but is it all the time, or is it just part of the time, Reid?
Our crew, every crew composition is a little different. On the space station at any given time, you're always going to have at least one American, one U.S. astronaut, and you're going to have at least probably one or two, maybe even three Russian astronauts. And then beyond that, it's a little mixture of the European countries, Japan, and Canada. So our crew, we had one German, a couple Americans, and then our Russian colleagues. So on any given day, it's a global operation. It is truly the International Space Station, and it is truly an international effort every single day. And so what's really neat is the language on the space station. People always ask that question. And so the primary two languages are English and Russian. And you train so long in both of these countries that you start to develop, we call it Russlish, because sometimes it's easier to talk to your buddies in Russian if the Russian words are easier, like our crew quarters, where we sleep at night. In Russian, that's called a kayuta. And so we would all the Americans started just calling them kayutas, because that's a lot easier to say than crew quarters. And so you would see this across we call the ISS the stack in space. So across the stack, you would hear this mixture of Russian and English throughout the day. And then a lot of us were trying to pick up Japanese so we could talk to the Japanese flight controllers, not fluently, but just to say good morning and thanks and, I don't understand, and wakarimasu and ohayo gozaimasu. And it was just really fun, When you can start to speak in another language, it's amazing how much more pride that people start to have when you're talking to them. And I love that aspect of it. So it was great to learn Russian, and I can't wait to move on to another language.
There's part of the training is learning the languages as well and kind of getting in there, or is that kind of a bonus?
So I flew on a Russian launch vehicle. So I launched on a Russian Soyuz, and I landed on that vehicle. So for that alone, all of the documentation is in Russian. All of the instruction is in Russian. So you absolutely have to learn at least that technical chunk of Russian. And in the end, you live over there for about a year in your training, off and on, and you really do become almost fluent in Russian. So it's really nice as an American to go over to Russia, and then the people look at you, they know you're an American, and then you start throwing out this kind of slangish Russian from the place that you lived in, and they all look at you and, you're not from Moscow, but you talk like you're from Moscow, and so I love that. I think just learning all these different cultures, that's truly, I think when I look back on this 20 years from now, it'll be the friendships I made in Japan, Russia, Germany, and that just learning those different cultures, especially as an American, to get out there and see the rest of the world was a extremely unique and really, really cool opportunity.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Can put my hand up like in the classroom, apparently. So speaking of learning other languages and living with other languages and other cultures on the ISS, what are some of the weird and sort of fun little cultural quirks that you kind of picked up that you wouldn't necessarily see? I mean, just like thinking of like the history of NASA astronauts, it's very like, we're all military and we're all very like the mission, and I just sort of wanted, like, you hear about, crazy Russian traditions of toasting with vodka all the time. Like, was there anything that was just like, this is just, I'm going into space, but this is also just all nuts and all fun all the way down? Yeah,
superhuman stuff.
Yeah.
Come on, this is an online public Google Hangout, so we got to keep some of our secrets. But no, it is. You're absolutely right, Amy. There are traditions, and the Russians really are a culture of traditions that have built up from time to time. And so every single toast, it always has this, they say the number 3 and then the number 4, and then everyone in the room just screams, hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. And, so we would always have that on the space station. If something was going good, somebody would just yell out, 3-4, and then from somewhere else you'd hear, hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. And so, yeah, there are crazy things like that all the way across the board. And I just, another really funny one that I probably shouldn't even talk about, but just a Russian culture, as an American, you're used to being kind of kind and gentle, and you want to work through things diplomatically. Well, the Russians, they definitely do that, but they will respond instantaneously if you just get real stern and you give them a real strict one-liner. And so it's sometimes like your best friends in Russia are the ones that you've had that 1 second argument with, and it's like two dogs in a park barking at each other, and one barks a little louder, and then they're friends for a while. And I noticed that throughout all of my training. It was really, really neat. So sometimes you just gotta stand your ground. As an American, it feels a little weird, but then once you stand your ground for that second, then you just created this best friend that you're gonna have forever. All that culture stuff is great.
Oh, and speaking of culture, you were able to watch the World Cup, weren't you, from the space station? What was that like? Come on, that's
well, it was great because I ended up without hair. I went into the opposite of Ian by the end of the World Cup. So it was what an opportunity, and so lucky for Alex and myself. He's German astronaut with the European Space Agency, and his country goes on to win the whole thing. And we had really just come up to the space station when the World Cup started. And we would gather in what's called Node 1, which is where the American astronauts eat their dinner. And we also have a single-channel television feed that gets pumped up to us there. And it was every single night, the Russians would come over, our German colleague would come in, the Americans, and we would all be huddled around. And it didn't matter which country was playing. We would be huddled around that television watching soccer, watching football. And for us, that was like such a nice little slice of life to come together as a crew right at the beginning. And I think that formed a bond in our crew, especially in Expedition 40. That is really unmatched. It was just a great way to start it. Now, the famous bet that Alex did where I had to shave my head, and so did Steve Swanson, our commander, I don't know. I guess I learned that in space it's very nice to have no hair. It made the mornings a lot easier.
Another reason why I can't be an astronaut. I'm not cutting it. Yeah, so we got a question actually from a classroom. This could be an exam question, so make sure it's right. Where is the International Space Station? Because I don't think many people really appreciate how far away it is or how close it is. People don't really know where it is. So where is the International Space Station? It's a basic question.
It's a great question, and it's right up there. It's right next door, really. And we're 250 miles up, 400 kilometers up there, and sure, that seems like a lot, but think if you just jumped in your car and drove for a couple hours, you're that far away. And so we're almost completely out of the Earth's atmosphere, but in reality, when I would fly over Texas, I was pretty close to my family, and I was so close that they could just go outside and look up at night and see me fly over. And in fact, if anybody has like a personal amateur radio, a ham radio, even just a handheld radio, you could talk to us when we're directly overhead, just with the power of that thing. So I like to look at, if you had a globe that's about this big, we're not much farther away than about a human hair. So we're really just off the surface of the planet.
It's very cool. And also, to stay in orbit, I just had a Twitter question from one of my followers. How do you stay in orbit? Were you there? I mean, is there like a booster?
So how do we stay in orbit? Just from a basic perspective, is about every 30 days we actually have a little thruster on the back of the Russian segment, and they'll just provide just a little bit of energy to us to keep us up there, because there is still a bit of drag, and maybe Nadine could pitch in and answer this better, but there's a little bit of atmospheric drag, and there's magnetic changes as we go around the Earth, and I think these two factors sort of pull on us a little bit, and they'll slowly bring the space station down towards Earth, and we're talking a tiny amount. And so once a month, we'll just turn on these really tiny thrusters for about a minute or two, and you can barely feel it on the space station, but that'll bump our orbit back up. And Nadine, I don't know if you have a technical addition to that, but go ahead if you want.
I would just add that the space station, it's not in a static spot always over one spot of the Earth. So the velocity that it has as it's going around the Earth is partly what's keeping it in orbit. And then there is a little bit of gravity. It's not totally true that it's zero G up there. So that's why it slowly starts to come down and requires the reboost that Reid was talking about.
So just to follow up on that, because there's a little bit of microgravity, if you were to like leave something, would it over time eventually settle toward the Earth side of the station? I don't know how long that might take, but I mean, is it that much gravity, or?
It does that, Trace, but only because of orbital mechanics, not because of the little bit of microgravity. But we would do that, actually. We had, someone had left a clear acrylic ball. Almost think of like a plastic beach ball that's clear. And Alex Durst, my German buddy, he put marbles inside of that. And we would put it up on the ceiling, and sure enough, they were at the bottom, and you could put it down. You know, those marbles would move around based on where he would put that ball in the space station, and so it was pretty neat to see that. And we would always say like that we had this PMM module that stuck out the bottom of the space station, and you could take a huge, heavy bag and PMM, and it was like a gravity well down there. It would just slowly kind of suck that thing up. So it is neat, but it's all orbital. That was for us. That was all orbital mechanics and just playing around with that.
Yeah. Super cool. What is, okay, this is, I guess it's a question for both of you because I imagine Nadine has to get in on this too, but we have a question from Twitter, and his name is Will Smith. He wants to know, it's not the Will Smith, but his name is Will Smith. And he wants to know what your favorite space food is. I assume you probably both have an answer. I don't know.
Nadine, I'll let you go first, and then I'll tell you whether to believe it or not.
Okay, well, I have had a chance to try a lot of the space food, going to different classes and training events with the crew. Do I have a favorite? I don't know. I gotta admit, don't want to get in trouble here, but I wasn't like super impressed. I mean, it was okay, but I think probably some of the desserts were my favorite, honestly.
Yeah, Trace, without going into all the medical data, I may or may not have gained about 10 pounds while I was up there, so I was on the other side of Nadine's equation. I found all the food to be, although it's not great, but overall it was pretty good. And but there was one in particular, it's like the love of my life of food, and it was called chocolate pudding cake, and it's this mashed up mix of cake, chocolate, and pudding, and it's all in one container mixed together, and my crew knew that I loved that. So on Friday afternoons, they would always present me with a chocolate pudding cake, and I would get to eat it. And perhaps I ate too many of those, but I love that stuff.
Yeah, because in addition to that, I spoke to astronaut Leroy Chow a while ago, and he was saying that when he was in space, the microgravity environment actually enhanced flavors for him. It was like a weird experience, like his sense of smell increased and his taste buds increased. Is that a standard thing, or was that just his experience?
Everybody has a slightly different experience, but I noticed that some astronauts really, their senses actually dull, and their sense of taste dulls out. I had his experience where I like spicy food, but when I was on the space station, if I would eat even a mild salsa, that was too spicy for me up there, and so I had that experience where everything was extremely flavorful for me. So I think but it is weird. It's very individualistic.
Awesome.
Amy, I think, wanted to ask.
Yeah. So we're talking about like how awesome it is to be in space,
Yeah.
and to be an experiment, to do experiments and look at the Earth, and the joy of cultural traditions and stuff. But I mean, you were up there for 165 days, and I mean, at some point, does the kind of excitement of it wear off? Does it stop being like, oh my God, I'm an astronaut, and just become, oh, it's just a job? Like, does that happen? Do you ever sort of kind of settle into just like, this is my life?
So this is a great question. We talked about this a little bit beforehand, and it's life up there. So not every day is a great day. There are bad moments in any day in space, just like you got bad moments down on Earth. Overall, though, you can really help out your bad moments by just going to the cupola and looking out at the Earth, and that cures kind of all ailments. But for me personally, and this is just my personal story, at about a month and a half of being in space, I did feel like, all the newness is worn off, and I'm a little bit bored, and that sort of stuff. But what was really neat is I had a renaissance, kind of almost at that time. And by the time I left in my 5.5-month period, I was so eager for the next day, so eager to look at the Earth, so eager to play with the water and just to play with all this floating stuff. So for me, the experience the newness wore off at a month and a half, but then the experience became richer and richer and richer. And by the time I left the space station, I was craving a return, actually. So yeah, it's stayed interesting all the way through the end.
And I'm going to jump in because I just found a question on Twitter from a classroom of 5th graders that seem to be watching. And they wanted to know, and I kind of want to know too, did you have any fear involved going up into space the first time? I mean, it looks awesome, but there's also the reality of strapping yourself to a rocket and blasting off the planet.
Oh, Amy, there are a lot of realities to that. It's a great question. And if anyone says that that's not scary, then they are completely lying or trying to be macho or something. There's an interesting thing that I learned about myself, and and it was that my highest fear was about 3 days before the event. So about 3 days before launch, I was really filled kind of with some fear, some worry, things like that. And then as I got out to the rocket on launch day, the fear kind of turns to pure excitement, and I'm sure adrenaline plays a lot in your body on that one. By the time we rode the elevator up and got into our rocket, our heart rates were around 60 to 70 beats a minute, which is pretty much resting. And by the time they lit the engine, it was completely normal feeling. And then I got to roll through this entire set of emotions again before my first spacewalk. About 3 or 4 days before it, honestly, I think if NASA had said, "Are you ready to go?" I would have said, I'm a little scared. I don't know. And I was talking to some guys who had done spacewalks before, and they said, "Hey, that's a totally normal feeling, and just get outside and you'll love it." And they were absolutely right. So by the time the event came around, I was so excited and filled with adrenaline, and it's amazing. And so it's kind of neat to see. So for me, it was about a 3-day lag from the fear setting in to the excitement of the event coming. And there's definitely times that you're a little bit scared, but that's good. That gets your body kind of ready to cope with these major events, just like jumping out of an airplane with a parachute or anything like that.
Yeah, I bet. Jeez. What about like Nadine? What about like how do you prepare for stuff like that? I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about like the psychology of it and like but the physical and emotional training has got to be pretty intense as well, you know, not just the procedural trainings and things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's something we can't fully recreate here on Earth. So what we try to do is we try to put together events that provide some sort of stress or pressure on them. Yeah, it won't be the exact same kind of stress that they had, that they'll have on board, but get used to trying to work through these procedures and do what needs to be done no matter what the tension or the pressure is. And then I know, I mean, my team wasn't part of this, but I know, or at least I understand, they spend a lot of time talking to the families and the crew about, learning about themselves and how to deal with all these things. So I'll toss that back over to Reid.
No, you're exactly right, Nadine. We were just, you and I were sitting together this morning at one of our debriefs, and it's a really tough thing. How do you provide the stress? How do you give the person the stress? Because that's what you face in space every day, and that's kind of the thing that wears on you up there is you always have, that there's 1,000 people on the ground watching everything you do, and so that's stressful. Launch is stressful. Emergency is stressful, and so how do you work that into the training? I think they do a pretty good job because when I would show up to a training event here at NASA, I've got 10 evaluators with clipboards, and I don't want to make them mad at me. I want to make them happy, and so in its own way, that is kind of a nice stress, and that's a good way to kind of recreate the stress of being in space.
Right, I've got a question for Reid, but also for everybody, because I think this is quite a searching question. Now, it's a question from Twitter, from Kasrazandri. Would you ever go on a one-way mission to anywhere in space? I mean, obviously, it's very fashionable with Mars One right now, talking about sending a manned expedition on a one-way mission. And obviously, you've got to think about your family and all the things you'd leave at home. But would that be a thought that you would entertain? And starting with Reid on that one.
That's a great question, and I get asked that an awful lot. I'm 39 years old, and I got a wife, and I got 2 little kids that I love desperately. And so for me, in my phase of my life, that is not a mission that I could sign up for because I've got a lot of stuff I want to do on the Earth before I leave it. However, I would say if you ask me in 20 years, and if there's, sure, why not? To go to Mars, you would be willing to risk a lot, I think. But in my phase of my life, I'm not willing to say yes to that. But ask me that question again in a little while, Ian, and we'll see how the answer changes. Yeah, perhaps around retirement age, retire on Mars, like Elon Musk. I think that's good for me. So, Nadine, would you do that?
I got to go with Reid on this one. I think, at this point, no, because there are things that I want to do and things that I enjoy here. Down the road, I don't know. No, never say never, that's for sure.
Right. Nadine, I guess I want to ask, like, are you interested in going to space if you have the option?
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. I kept telling Reid and the rest of his crew that if they found a little extra space, I'd be happy to take it for them. Fill it up and go take care of some of those more unpleasant things on board so they wouldn't have to worry about it.
That actually lines very well with someone wants to know, these same 5th graders, they want to know how much space is there on the ISS? So Nadine, if you wanted to go, how many people could it hold? How much room is there?
I think once you're on the space station, it's pretty good. I've heard it compared to about the size of a 5-bedroom house. Reid would have a little more firsthand knowledge on that. But I think more of the issue is getting there and coming back, to be perfectly honest. Right now we don't have a whole lot of extra space there. But I think once you get
going
there,
away on a Soyuz.
Well, let's see if we've got more viewer questions here. Oh, this is a good one. When you get back to Earth, Reid, what does it feel like? Can you describe, like, people who never get to leave? We don't really get that sensation of Earth gravity being kind of a struggle, or what is it like? Describe it for us.
The one-word answer is wobbly. I was very wobbly. So let me back that up, though. Immediately after our capsule touched down, and we're back under gravity for the first time in 6 months, you feel a little bit queasy. I felt a little sick to my stomach. Things didn't feel right. Your hands and your arms are impossibly heavy. Like we just would sit. I sat there and just laughed. I picked my arm up and then let it drop and just laugh. Like, this piece of muscle and bone does not weigh that much, but it did. And then our capsule actually tipped over, and so I spent the first 5 minutes trying to kind of hold myself up, pushing on my capsule, and it was making me very sick. And so after that, I relaxed completely, and I allowed my face just to be smashed into my visor. And there's a great picture of me just kind of smashed in the capsule. And once I did that relaxation, everything became very peaceful. My stomach settled way down, and I just kind of laid there for a few minutes, just allowing gravity to just suck me down onto my spacesuit, and I felt good. For about the first 15 hours back, you feel heavy. Your head is okay in this direction, but if you lean it forward and it gets over center, you just feel like there's a 200-pound weight just sucking your head down, and it feels really funny. So I would do it a couple times just to laugh. And then, but then your body it gets back to normal pretty quick. And by the time I was back here in Houston about 20 hours after landing, I was walking fairly well. And by the next day, I felt really good. There's still funny things like trying to throw your dirty laundry into a hamper. It would fall a good 5 feet short, and things like that. And so it took a while to, like, flip a flashlight or a screwdriver. I would mess that up for even 2-3 weeks. And then just yesterday in my office, Takuya Onishi, he's going to fly soon with the Japanese Space Agency, but he said, "Hey, Reid, do you have a pen?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I went to throw a pen, and it only made it about halfway there. So I know I'm not quite adapted back. So those are kind of the big things that stick out in my mind, Trace.
See, Amy, do you have a question or two to ask?
Yeah. One thing I've always just kind of wondered about is waking up in space. I guess this is sort of related to what you were just talking about, but I mean, does it take you a second to remember that you're not at home in your bed with your family, that you're actually in space? I mean, do you have that sort of momentary disorientation first thing in the morning where you're sort of like, oh yeah?
Amy, what a great question. And in fact, at the end of about week 2, I was talking to my crewmate Alex, and I was asking him this exact thing, because here's what would happen. In your little crew quarters, it's about the size of a telephone booth. And when you close your doors, it's pitch black. There is no light in there whatsoever. And I love that. I love sleeping in absolute dark. But what happens is, I think because you're floating and you're attached to the wall in the sleeping bag, when you wake up, every single day I would wake up feeling upside down or backwards, and I would be reaching out to get to my light, and I'm reaching totally in the wrong spot. I mean, completely in the wrong spot. And so I just have to pull open my door if I could find it and let the light pour in from the cabin so that I could reorient myself. And it's like that feeling when the first day you wake up in a hotel room and you wake up and look around and wonder where you are. Well, in space, you don't just have that feeling. You wake up and wonder if you're right side up or upside down. You have no bearing at all. And that actually, over time, that did go away. But it was such an intense feeling that I was actually worried that maybe something was wrong with me. But then all my crewmates experienced the exact same thing, so I knew it was fine. That's a great question.
I think related, I'm going to use my last question for this one. Did you have any really funky dreams in space? I mean, because I've had some weird dreams here on Earth. I just couldn't imagine what it's like up in space. I just wonder what your experiences were and if you remember any of them.
I did have a lot of dreams. I think I slept lighter up there than I do on Earth. But Ian, it's a shame to say I didn't have really crazy dreams. The one thing that I noticed when I first got there is the first few nights I would dream of weird gravity. It wasn't normal Earth gravity and it wasn't floating, but it was like weird. Like I remember really specifically, one of the first dreams I had up there. I was in a car and I pulled up to a stoplight and I went to get out of the car and I floated out of the car. So it's that sensation of there was gravity for a few moments in this dream, and then the gravity in my dream went away and I was floating in this dream. And so I think my body was just trying to adapt to this odd thing and think its way through it. But other than that, my dreams were very normal. And interestingly enough, after that floating dream, I didn't have a whole lot of floating dreams. Normally my dreams were just normal gravity dreams up there. So it was almost disappointing. I was hoping for more out of my dreams.
That's awesome.
I guess it'd be weird to dream that you were flying when you're actually flying in space, I guess. Kind of weird.
That would be kind of cool.
Yeah. Double flying? I don't know.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that I know you just got back, Reid, and you've mentioned a couple of times. Would you go back to space? How long did you spend up there?
I would go back. For me, we were joking. I would love to come home, see my family, hug my kids, and if I could take them with me, I would go forever. That is such a wild place up there. It is so much fun, and the human body loves to be in microgravity. So I would go back, and I hope I get the chance to go back. And for me, it might be 3 or 4 years down the road, but just to have that, I'm looking forward to it, and that's where I'm heading.
It's interesting to me that you say the human body loves microgravity, just because a lot of our stories on DNews and elsewhere that you read are like what degrades and what doesn't work anymore, or what feels funny, or the idea that I know astronauts, I think, have a completely different experience with it. I've never met an astronaut that was like, I was flying and that sucked. They're all like, it was amazing, it was the best. Like, so when you say it's like, it's great for the human body in that way. It may not be necessarily medically amazing, but it does feel great.
Trace, you hit the nail on the head. So the scientists may not like what it's doing to me, but I loved what it was doing to me. It was so cool.
Well, I think we're running out of time. We've had a lot of questions, and I can't list everybody, but like David, Gio, Rohan, Desmuk, I can't pronounce your last name, Rohan, and so many other people. They all want to know. They're college students, they're elementary school, middle school, high school, and they all want to know in various countries ranging from the United States to England to Turkey how they can get involved with NASA, with astronaut programs. I mean, Nadine, if people are interested, what kind of things should they do in their lives to kind of get involved in space programs?
Well, for those that are still in school, making sure you're studying engineering, physics, math, the sciences is really important. Have that kind of background coming in. But also, as Reid said from the very beginning, going out and actually doing something with it, some of this operations idea, that's really useful to get some good experience. And I know, and I can, because I feel this way myself, right? Everybody wants to be an astronaut. But, not everybody can be. But there are a lot of really awesome jobs here at NASA that, I had no idea of before I started working here. But everything from, being an instructor, working in the Mission Control Center, in the engineering areas, development, there's a lot of things that people can do here. And so, yeah, go for it. Go for being an astronaut. But keep in mind there's a lot of other cool ways to get involved, too.
And Trace, can I just throw one last thing? I know we're running out of time, but I want to
go for it.
And so we've been flying into space for a long time, and I think there is still so much fascination with this career field. The thing I'd like to say is people always talk about a golden age, and when we had Apollo, that was the golden age. But watch out, because I think we're approaching this golden age of space travel right now. We have 2 companies competing to send U.S. astronauts into space. The Russians are sending astronauts. China's sending astronauts. India might be working on it. We have Orion, which just did a test flight, and it's going to send people around the moon to an asteroid, maybe even onto Mars. And there's tons. This world is just exploding all of a sudden. And beyond just the human side of getting into space, we have rovers that are looking at Mars right now and sending back amazing images. We're going around Venus. We're looking at Mercury. We're heading out to Saturn. So this is watch it. This is the golden age, and we're approaching it. We're in it right now, and it's a sweet spot for all of us that love space. And so let's enjoy the ride while we can.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, I think that's probably on that note. That's a pretty good place to end it. Guys, thank you so much for talking to us. Reid, Nadine, you guys are awesome. Keep up the good work. And thanks for watching, all of you out there in internet land. You can find more science news, more space news, and all sorts of other stuff by subscribing to DNews on YouTube. You can find more information about the International Space Station at nasa.gov/station. You can also find Ian's writings on discoverynews.com. NASA and DNews have great social media presences. Definitely go and follow Astro_Reid if you want to know more about Reid here, or any of us on Twitter or Facebook. We are all over the place. And thanks for your questions. This was fantastic. Guys, have a good one, and keep looking up.